Okay, so you see the document now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is a poem that went through a lot of changes on its way to its final version. So I think the best way to present the evolution of it is to start with the finished version. And then we'll go back to the first one and you can see how it made its way to the finished version. Okay, so this is the final version. And the only thing I changed coming to this one was the title. I'm pretty sure everything else about this was on the previous version, but I'll just read it through in its final version. Once I thought I was wrong, but I was mistaken. My first pets were fish. I was keen, named everything in the aquarium. Each fish, and even the plants, Philip and Geoffrey, and lo, 2 water snails stowed away in the foliage, a pair of gentlemen callers welcomed as accidental pets, which spawned an infestation. Oh, but they were never that. I had named them, Xavier and Ignatius. How can a thing fall out of being once given a name? A name will carry you even through hell if you hold fast to it. Or so goes, blessed, unfalsifiable, the lore. But what of the gentle Brontosaurus that is no more and never was? Head of one Apatosaurus, body of another, the specious species arose not from primordial soup, but from a wishful will to find the next big thing. We all believed this fiction, figuring paleontologists ought to know. And poor demoted Pluto, once counted 9th amongst our planets, what now of the handy mnemonic it neatly completed? My very earnest mother just served us 9. What? Just served us nothing. Maybe I loved Pluto for its eccentricity, skewed orbit, outlier aloofness. In retrospect, the many anomalies should have tipped us off. This was not one of our own, stood out in left field, watching the clouds go by. It belongs to another tribe, another class of object altogether. Nothing to do with us. Is it you I long for, my lost pets? I know you are false. I do not love you. But I loved thinking I knew how the stars were situated, what the bones meant, dug up in the American West. How tiring it is forever revising one's map of the world, each supplanting discovery, each step closer to true feels more unsteady. Oh, my Brontosaurus, my Pluto, my bonus water snails, is it to some graveyard at the edge of town you've gone? Are you languishing in the Kuiper Belt, that junkyard of disused forms that cool from star to rock and stand as monuments to a lovelier reckoning of themselves? So that is the finished version, and it started out very differently. Even the title was different. It started out as Lost Pets, and in this version, it's kind of an idea cloud. The idea was brought up by a conversation that I had with a friend of mine about how you like kind of feel personally affronted when your scientific facts get changed. You know, it's discovered that what you thought was right is wrong. And so it was just kind of a cloud of ideas in the beginning. In this version, it shows how much of the original draft survived to the final draft. And a fair bit of it did. All of the blue does end up in the final draft. So, like, big chunks of it made it all the way through. The parts that are highlighted here, the asteroid belt just became a little bit more specific in the final version. And the idea of commemoration was already there, and an idea of themselves, but how exactly I put it was not how I wanted it on the first go round. But that idea was in place at the beginning. So on the next edit, I made some structural changes. You can see that this line at the bottom of the previous draft has been moved up top. And that whole thing, the whole Einstein concept, got thrown out of the poem later because this was a thing that was kind of a little blip for about 5 minutes or so while I was writing this poem. Some scientists thought they might have found that the speed of light was not constant, which would have like really wrecked all the calculations. But when it was put to peer review, it turned out, no, it's fine. Speed of light is still the speed of light. It's a constant. So that all just got pitched. There's some new lines. The green here indicates new lines that showed up in this draft. And some of these didn't make it to the final. The 20th Century Beast didn't make it, I think, even to the next edit. I'm not sure. And what was it I wanted to put here? Oh, okay. This highlighted part again, the concept has shown up here on this draft, but that's not how I finally phrased it. But yeah, this getting more specific about Pluto is new to this draft. I think the structural thing that happened in this draft was really separating out a stanza for each of the concepts. Each of the things that went wonky on me gets its own stanza in this draft. So it's starting to get a little bit more organized. And this highlighted part just got thrown out. Right, so this is all new, this description of Pluto and the aloofness and everything. These itses got thrown out in a later draft. But a lot of the new content came in on this draft, a lot of the specifics, and going into detail about my aquarium fish. So that's all new to that draft. And why do I have this highlighted? I think it's that this got moved. Did it? Trying to see if that got moved. Yeah, that was in a different place on the previous draft. So things really got shifted around and a lot of new material added on that draft. This one, I looked and looked and I could find no change between this draft and the previous one. And I think what happened here is I opened the thing up, started a new draft, and I probably like added a comma, removed a comma, you know, that kind of work of trying this, trying that. And I wasn't sure if I had changed it substantially. And so I just saved this version, which apparently is completely unchanged. But that's part of the process. That's why I left this in here. And it still has this opening, right? That hasn't been thrown out yet. Okay, on this draft, it really takes on the structure that it has in its finished version, right? The opening stanza is there. And it moves through these ideas in the way that it does in the final poem. So there's a little bit more new material, the characterizing the gentle brontosaurus. And this idea of it being a wishful will is a little bit different tone from, I think in the previous version, it's a little bit more accusatory. Let me see. Now I'm not finding it on the previous version. Oh yes, on this version it's a paleontologist's need to one-up his rival, which is a little bit harsh assumption. They might have just made a mistake, but you know, you do kind of have there is a little bit of wishfulness in there that you want to discover a new thing. But that becomes a little bit more gentle in the next go round. And this comes into a little bit more, the language becomes a bit tighter and more specific on this version. And this part here, I think what happened here is the line breaks changed. So that's a thing that usually comes like late in the revising process, is making sure all the line breaks are doing as much work as they can. Okay, this one has a little bit more of the refinement, some more changes to the line breaks. And this is where the extra itses are taken out. It was its eccentricity, its skewed orbit, and its outlier aloofness, which isn't really necessary. So this is kind of like a streamlining edit. And what changed here? Yeah, I think I changed a lot of the line breaks in this stanza. And this phrase is new, the languishing in the Kuiper belt. I knew there was a name for that asteroid belt, and I finally went and looked it up. So, and also just the being a little bit more specific about what it's doing there, that it's languishing out there. And then this version is the final version, and the only thing that changed about it is the title, which it had been called Lost Pets, because it started as just the concept of ideas that turn out to be wrong, and then they're sort of like pet ideas that were taken from you. And it became this title because in the intervening time, the Pluto, which had been demoted as a planet, was reinstated, and brontosauruses also were reinstated. So these developments simultaneously ruined my poem and proved its point. So I changed the title to Once I Thought I Was Wrong, but I Was Mistaken. Because, of course, none of these things I'm bemoaning are even an issue anymore, but that's what happens with these things. So that was the final thing. And at a certain point, it had been, you probably noticed, it had been dedicated to my friend Dave Clark in an earlier version. Let's see. Up here, it was for David. And I don't know, at some point, it didn't seem to be so much about that conversation anymore. That had just been a jumping off point, and it had become something more personal. So that went away, and the very last edit was just changing the title, because also I think that title was not doing a lot for the poem. The lost pet aspect was evident in the poem and didn't really need to be there in the title. So that is the journey of my poem, Once I Thought I Was Wrong, but I Was Mistaken.
What do you mean by the line breaks? Is that the physical form of
Oh yes,
the stanzas, or
where you end the line and begin a new line?
Right. Is that for symmetry or just in like a paragraph, or I'm just curious, that's all.
It's for, it's not always for this, but sometimes with a line break, you can work a word both ways. So it's at the end of the phrase on the line that it's on, but it's also part of the next line. Like syntactically, it's part of the next line, but visually it's part of the line it's on. And so you're kind of working it both ways there. And other places it's a little bit for symmetry and just what goes with what on the line. You can give, I use enjambment a lot, which is like breaking in the middle of a thought and then it continues on the next line. So you can put things together on a line that are not together in a sentence, like you can have a period in the middle of the sentence, but these two sentence fragments are part of the same line, so they are linked in that way.
And it might also be like a rhythmic type of thing too, with the way that the, you know, sort of perhaps the rhythm of the line or the rhythm of the poem, and how that works with that idea that you're communicating.
Right.
So, I mean, that's the way that I sort of relate that that idea that you're explaining about line breaks and how they sort of work in different ways and they have purpose. They're not just arbitrary.
Yeah. It's not just like, oh, okay, that's X number of characters, I better hit the shift key. Although that can become an issue with publishing because there's, you know, if you're doing a 6x9 book, there's only so many characters are going to fit on a line. So if you leave a long line, it's going to get kind of arbitrarily broken if you don't deliberately break it. So that's a consideration. But my lines are usually not all that long, so I don't run into that too much.
Can I just say how incredibly beautifully and happily surprised I am by that piece? I really don't know you. I mean, you're one of the people I haven't known for like 25 years, not as many, but you know, and I didn't really, I know you're a poet because you talk about poetry all the time, but I love the more that your mind thinks. I just love the sort of channels that you go down and the connections that you made between the subjects in the poem. I love the use of language. I love the stretching of your, you know, like words in there that I'm not used to seeing in a poem. And one of the things that was fascinating was this was edited over a year or so. Is that?
Yeah.
I was looking at the dates, and it really struck me how similar that your process of this particular, it was do you call that a long form poem? Because
no, it runs just over a page, so that's not especially long.
Okay.
It's like,
okay, it's longer than the poetry that I'm used to sort of engaging with. So it seemed more, it just seemed very deep to me in that it just covered a lot of ground in the space that it had. And I just really, I really love the way that you just introduced different connections into this idea of, you know, having, like you introduced it as your pets, you know, and when you, I mean, the idea of the dinosaurs, you know, sort of coming from that, like the very small to the very large, you know, and then it just went out into the universe. It just went out to Pluto, you know, and it was just like this very sort of incredibly and then the belt, Kuiper's belt, it was just super, just really this expansive feeling to it that just totally unexpected from the fish. And and I didn't know the mnemonic for the planets, so that was exciting to hear as well. I'd never heard that before.
I thought of that initially. I think somebody in a poetry workshop helped me with that, because I thought everybody had that in school, that same, thing that you go through that sentence and it gives you the order of the planets.
I really need associations when I remember things, and I just thought people were really smart that could remember the order of the planets, like as they went out. So anyway, I just wanted to, say here, that was great. I really enjoyed it, and I loved your process. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to hear from other folks.
I was curious about the way you talked about analyzing the poem, and it was very particular, the way you kind of addressed these things that you saw in it that you wanted to change. And I wondered, because as Jackie was saying, the poem's kind of cosmic. It starts out with this little, the microscopic, and it goes to this cosmic level, and yet to see you talking about it and working on it, it's very particular about how you're thinking about the line endings, the particular words, how the ideas fit and all that. And I just wondered, like, as you're working on this over a period of time, do you have sort of like a regular schedule, like a notebook full of ideas, and okay, I have to go through that notebook and I have to spend so much time working on these things? Or is it just kind of as the spirit moves you, I'm thinking about that poem, I'm going to go back to that poem and work on it? I mean, how does that work for you?
It's pretty haphazard. I think what often happens is I go to look for things that are finished and ready to send out to submit, and I do a ton of editing. Don't end up submitting anything. But I get a bunch of editing work done because I go to look at something and I'm like, oh, this is almost ready to submit if it just needs something different at the end or something. So it's kind of haphazard when I get around to editing them.
So I'm kind of knee deep in the notion of throwing things out, it's interesting what we throw out and how we throw it out, and what's in our heads when we throw it out. And we just experienced this poem in which, in a way, the most important thing you did for over almost a year period is toss things out for one reason or another.
Yes.
And I mean, and that's essentially the ball game. In fact, that's what your life work is about. But I don't want to get into that one. But yeah, what's interesting is asking, okay, why did you throw it out? Or did it tell you to throw it out? That's, I can tell you that the drawing I just threw out told me that it could go to hell. It told me. It took me that long for it to tell me that. And I figured out why I rejected it, but that's a process. I'm not saying anything wise about it. I'm just putting it on the table as really, we always think about the finished thing or strive to the finished thing, but talking about the thing that's thrown out is pretty damned interesting. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a lot of the work. It's sort of like the work of memory. A lot of the work of memory is throwing out things that you don't need to remember so that you can have room for the things that you do need to remember.
That's interesting.
Have you written a poem about that?
I haven't. I probably
About
should.
memory? I think that would be a great idea. I'd like to know more about that. You were honing in over a very long time and honing out also, and you were keeping track. You know, you were not throwing out the versions.
Mm-hmm.
You were keeping them so you could go back to the initial version if you wanted to check something. And that was very interesting. I wondered how, now you said that it was a bit haphazard, you know, in your editing, but approximately how much time did you allow the poem to rest before you went back?
Oh, well, at the beginning, I worked on it every couple of months, I think. The dates, I had put the dates on this document. And so I like what I often do is I get it into a state that I think it could be presentable, and I bring it to my workshop people because there are things that I think are crystal clear, and I take it to workshop and they have no idea what I'm talking about. Because, you know, there are associations that you think everybody has, and that is not the case. So then you have to go back and make it clearer, you know, like I think in an early version I had referenced that mnemonic, but I didn't say it was a mnemonic. And yeah, I think I brought that to my workshop and they're like, what the hell are you talking about? So there was that. And then I think the later edit was probably getting it ready to try and send it somewhere. And I felt like there's just, like, to my mind's ear, there was a little bit of a clunker here and there that, like, that's like Doug was saying, things tell you to throw them out. Like I also recite usually. So if I'm reciting something and I consistently miss a line or trip on that line, that's telling me like, this doesn't belong here. That's why you're tripping on it or missing it out, because it's not really part of the flow.
Also, you know, I think about in my own writing, has this changed me? You know, what have I discovered? What do you think concerning your poem? You know, what did you discover about your subject, about yourself?
I think, well, it was a multi-layered discovery. I mean, first of all, the subject of the poem was happening while I was writing the poem, right? So the thing about the speed of light maybe not being constant got pitched out in an early edit because that was, you know, the information changed. And, you know, and then the information continuing to change. And I guess maybe I made peace with the fact that everything I know could always be completely wrong. You know, it's true of everything. I mean, you have to go on these assumptions of what you think is true. That's, you have to work with what your best guess is. But I think maybe it helped me be more peaceful about just letting go if it turns out like, no, you just you just need to let go of that idea because it was off. I mean, that's the progress of science, right? They had to let go of the Brontosaurus, and then they had to bring him back. It turned out they were mistaken.
I think as artists, one word that comes up to me is authenticity. Is it true to yourself? Does this make sense? You know, we all have our bullshit meters, and that, you know, so that's kind of how I toss things out, because it's, you know, this isn't right. This isn't me. You know, this doesn't speak for me from here. So why am I doing it? And that kind of leads me to throw things out.
I really like the one comment Cleva made. The notion that when she recited it, it told her something. It had a lot to say to her. I mean, in a way, there's this intellectual thing you're doing with on paper, you know, and then this business of actually saying it, it really brings you into it. The how you say it, or how it allows you to say it. I think that's really powerful. I think that gets back to both points of what the truth of the thing is, and it also brings it to you, to the person themselves. The interesting thing I might ask is, now Bill has spent his life. I see this easy enough with poetry and writing and music. There has to be a mode of this in the visual arts that Bill might be able to speak to, some parallel.
Well, I thought it was interesting, the idea of keeping your drafts, because I have so many, almost everything I do starts out great. And then it slowly goes downhill, but you can't get back to it because you got layers of paint and goop and God knows what on top. So while I keep a lot of unsuccessful work around for a while to try to figure out what went wrong. It's kind of interesting, this idea of what Dave was saying of, is this me? Is this what I want to say? Because, you know, even sometimes I'll finish things and go, well, I don't know, that doesn't seem right to me. That doesn't feel like what I want to say. And it's kind of interesting thing. But I often do wish I could have saved something that I went past, you know, because you have this thing and you can't save it, which is kind of, it's like with computers now, you can do that. You know, you can save the thing that you start and hold on to it and then reproduce it and then work on top of that or something. But anyway, it's I don't perform it, so that's kind of different. I have had situations where I'll hang a show and go in there and go, oh man, that's not that's not what I thought it was gonna be. But there's a lot of parallels. I don't know if I'm being clear, but those are the couple of things that come to mind. Yeah, Mary.
First of all, I love that poem. I want a copy of it. I love it. And part of what I love is the play with language and the use of language in such a gorgeous way, that is both, it's playful, but it's also like, it's just right. You know, it's, and like the ability to find just the right word or phrase. And like when you talked about the paleontologist and wanting to change it so that, because the one, it sounded a little, you know, and it's like, yeah, you know, that's the ability to do that. I love, I have such respect for, and I admire people that can just, they just somehow know how to find just the right word. And I got to thinking about this difference between, like, the poetry is both a visual and an oral art form.
Yeah,
and
for
it kind
sure.
of has to be able to operate on both, right? Because you write it and it's going to be read, it's going to be looked at by people, and so their eyes are kind of seeing the art, because they're probably not reciting it as they're first reading it. And so like the art that is read, and like you hear it inside your head, but you don't hear the words out loud. And then when you actually hear the words out loud, it's a very different experience than just reading. And I'm curious to know, because this is one of the things I, as a performer and as a storyteller, I've often talked about, is that when you read, especially children's books, when you read children's books, you can almost tell immediately which ones were written either to be read aloud or were written down after somebody had already developed the story by telling it, because the use of language is so different. That we write for reading differently than we write for speaking. And so I'm just curious about how you balance the two for yourself.
Well, I am always hearing it how it is going to sound. Like my mind's ear is always listening to like rhythm, and even like unconsciously, like I'll find later that I've done something with assonance that I didn't deliberately do, but sort of it was running along in my mind's ear, and it made me choose words that did that. So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of that. And then like performing it, when I recite a piece, I don't pause to make it clear where the line break is. So that any kind of extra something you get with the line break, you just don't get that if you're hearing it recited. That's like an Easter egg for people who are reading it on the page. And then those people don't get to hear all of the intonation that's intended for it. But, you know, I am thinking about it as two things at the same time. So I work both parts of that.
I think it's wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Can you explain that concept of assonance? Although I just quickly looked it up, I don't, can you?
It's like, it's kind of like alliteration, but it's with vowel sounds.
Okay, okay.
So you would have a line that has a lot of I sounds in the words, maybe, or a lot of ahs. And it's trickier because you don't identify it as much as you do, like too much alliteration can be like ridiculous. or if things get too rhymey, it's like what okay, calm down. But you can get away with a lot more assonance without it seeming too ornate.
That has become my new favorite word, so thank you.
Sure.
That's awesome.
It reminds me of trying to teach Shakespeare to kids, and having kids, like the first time they ever read Shakespeare, like they don't know what they're doing. And it's sort of like when people are reading, you know, reading scripture in church, and they stop at the end of a line break every single time, even if the thought continues, you know?
Right.
And, but when you start having, like with kids with Shakespeare, when you start having them pay attention to assonance, to consonants, to alliteration, well, and with Shakespeare, when Shakespeare breaks the rhythm is usually a very important moment. And so like being aware of those moments, and suddenly like when they start reading from punctuation mark to punctuation mark versus line by line, suddenly it makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
And I loved seeing your poem and hearing you read it, and hearing you read the thoughts as I was watching the where you wanted to really visually stress something in the way you had it, you know, lined up. But the thoughts all keep going, and it's beautiful. I really admire that a lot.
Well, thank you.
When you said here's another question. I'm sorry. When do you know that it's ready to go out?
Well, I don't. I think it's ready, and then I send it out, and then, you know, maybe nothing happens with it, or I don't know. I guess there are some pieces that I feel like that says what I want it to say. It's doing what I want it to do. So, you know, there are pieces like that that if I send it out and people don't want to publish it, I'm just like, okay, this
Okay.
this is just not for you right now.
It's really interesting to hear, and that was a really kind of insightful question, Mary, because, for example, like when I write a song, or when I used to write songs, when I was performing, I would usually be visualizing in my head where I'm standing, what stage I'm on, essentially. Many times I was on Godfrey's in my head too. And it's curious to me, like how that question relates to how you contextualize performance, whether it is performance in the context of a published work or performance in the context of you are delivering the performance as a poet. Cleveland.
Was that a question?
Yeah, I'm curious, like, how does that, and it might be something from Maryland too, it's just like in the context of your poetry and when you're writing it, you think it's ready to go out to be published. When do you know it's ready? Was Mary's kind of sort of how she set that up. And I'm saying, like, when I'm thinking, and I'm writing a song, not so much, but a little bit, I'm thinking about where am I standing, which stage I'm on, who is my audience, who are they, how are they receiving this line? You know, that was my...
I think about how it will be in performance. And then sometimes I discover there are laugh lines in my poem that I didn't realize were laugh lines. Like I was deadly earnest, and I perform it and people crack up. And then the next time I perform it, like I have that in the back of my mind, like this is actually kind of a funny thing. And so I deliver it differently. So there's the feedback thing. But like I've had things published and then still edited them later. Like I thought it was done. And I felt like it was a completion at the moment when it got published. But then later I looked at it again for whatever reason and was like, you know, this could be different. And then, you know, it gets changed after the fact.
A great way to see what could be changed is to have it published.
Yes. For sure.
Just to open the journal and say, oh, well. When my book
Why
comes
did I
out,
do that?
Good point.
I think I know, and you know, my poetry is much shorter. I know when it has told me something. That I didn't know before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's not sure, because I can still see an error when it comes back.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, there are a few instances where, like, I literally did not know where the poem was going until it got there. And that is a hoot. But, you know, it's kind of rare that a poem surprises you that much, but it does happen.
This has been great. Once again, I'm gonna start working towards wrapping it up. Cleveland, hallelujah! So glad to do this with you.
Guys.
And once again, there are very few groups like this, period. But there are very few groups who are exploring this part of creativity. Everybody's bogged down into finding gigs and stuff. So I really appreciate doing this.